listeners, especially the ones that you don't already know. Yeah. You guys want to say a few words?
Yeah. Thanks, you guys, for coming. Again, my name is Yuri. I'm the co-president here at SSDP at VCU. If you guys need any help finding anything throughout the conference, come to myself or Rose. We will help you. Just a quick note, after this, we will move to the first breakout sessions. And there is a choice of one of two sessions there. One of them will be in here. The other one is going to be, it's on the other side of the building in what's called the forum room. There are signs there, and we'll help you get there. But just a heads up, it's on the other side of the building. And I think that's it. With that, I'll let Drew introduce our first speaker.
One quick note, real quick. So the bathrooms, for anybody who's curious, they're like right around the corner, basically right there, or like directly that way if you leave through that door. And there are also some upstairs right across from the James River Terrace where we had breakfast, where we will also have lunch. So if you need any advice on where things are or you need help with that, come to me or Yuri.
Good.
Awesome.
Just stepped out.
Excellent. Okay. So I want to introduce you to our opening speaker here. Longtime friend of SSDP and someone who godfather to SSDP. We as an organization would not be around, and we would not be what we are today without Eric. He's also the president of CJPF, Criminal Justice Policy Foundation. An amazing guy. If you have not met him already, I'm sure you'll get a chance to this weekend. Eric Sterling.
Thank you very much. I'm honored to be asked to be the opening speaker at this conference. The SSDP is important to me, and I am grateful that I'm a part of it. I like the people that I meet in SSDP. It's very satisfying for me to meet people at SSDP. They remind me of myself. I think if I were your age, I would be a member of SSDP. And so there's a sense of identification that I feel. It's an organization that is still new. It's an organization that is developing. It's an organization that still has a lot of challenges it has to meet. We're engaged in a lot of hard work. Our goal is ultimately to change a drug policy that is not merely counterproductive, it's immoral. It's founded on hatred. It's founded on the hatred of drug users. It believes that people who use drugs, our current policy is grounded on the belief that people who use drugs are outside the human family, that they deserve to be locked up, and that the tragedies that occur in their lives are their fault. The work that we're doing to end drug policy is extremely important. It's in the deepest traditions of the human rights movement, of the civil rights movement, of movements for social justice. We are about giving people the tools to have autonomy over their own lives and to establish a very important kind of liberty for the American people and for people around the world, which is the freedom to control your own brain, the freedom to control your thoughts, your dreams, and to manipulate them, because your brain is a biological processor of chemicals. That's what it is. And you ought to have the right to choose the chemicals you want to put into your brain. The idea that the spaces between your ears are off limits to you is preposterous. And yet that's the premise of the drug law, that certain parts of your brain, certain cells, certain neurotransmitters aren't yours to control. It's outrageous. What we're trying to do is very complicated. We want to replace the criminal traffic that is killing so many people. That ultimately means a system of regulation and control. We are deeply concerned about the suffering of drug users. And what we need to do, of course, is to build a to replace our counterproductive strategy. This is morally urgent. Some highlights of my own sort of background as a student to sort of share with you. the time, we live in times, are we looking at the big onslaught of World War III? Is the juxtaposition of Russian troops and Ukrainian troops going to lead to the same kind of thing we saw in 1914, a century ago, where unintended consequences of alliances, lead to some kind of conflagration. I was a student when I was your age. I lived in this kind of conflagration, and it was a time in which people like you were highly motivated to be. All right, let's see here. How did I? There we go. All right. So the last point on this particular slide, is that students were key players in opposing the war in Vietnam, and places like Kent State and Jackson State, they were being shot by the National Guard. My own response, like many of you, I dropped out of college. I wanted to work full time in the anti-war movement, and so that's what I did. This is a photograph of what I used to look like when I was your age. Examples of the kinds of things that I was involved in doing. The object in front of me is called a typewriter. A great tool. It doesn't respond to power failures, but it has its drawbacks. When I was your age, I felt that you had to sort of be morally engaged. You had to commit yourself. I had gone to a Quaker college. I didn't know even how to spell Quaker when I was in high school. I had been raised as an atheist, but I was moved by the ways in which Quakers had historically engaged the world. The earliest Quakers had gone to prison for their beliefs in the 17th century in England. They were leaders in the abolition movement, in the rights for women. They were the most prominent, early women suffragettes were Quakers, like Lucretia Mott, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and so forth. And so I found myself involved with Quakers doing this kind of stuff in those days. During my dropout days, I was, very much a hippie. I traveled around the country with, the long hair you saw in my backpack, hitchhiking, crashing, on floors, dropping acid, and so forth. And in Eugene, Oregon, where I was staying in a commune, I overheard a couple of people about your age complaining about their landlord, probably something any of you can relate to. And I thought to myself, gee, I could mediate that. But I realized as a simply a college dropout, I couldn't do that. But if I were a lawyer, I could solve this problem. And so I envisioned myself sort of living on the commune and bicycling to my office in Eugene and serving the people. And with that, I went back to college, graduated, and then went to law school. And while I was in law school, the marijuana movement was fomenting. Graduated from college in '73. That's the final Schaefer Commission report is coming out in '73. '76. Bob Randall is, in the process of suing the government to get medical marijuana, and I heard Keith Stropp speak, and so I got involved in trying to do marijuana activism. What I see with you are people who are passionate and committed, who want to engage in action. You have the opportunity in this organization to learn extremely valuable skills. You have an opportunity to build community, to find refuge from a lot of the bullshit in the society that we see around us. And part of what we have is an extraordinarily engaged alumni network. The affection you feel for SSDP is shared by people who've been doing this work for a long time. You're directly engaged in a way to make change happen, to make political change happen. And these issues around drug policy affect all of these. Social justice, of course. Human rights for all, for drug users, for people being persecuted because of their color in which drugs are used as the pretext for their persecution. Of course, public health, the spread of disease through our prohibition policy. Something on the order of a quarter of the deforestation in the Amazon is doing United States-funded fumigation of coca plants. Is due to the cutting down a forest to plant coca. But the reason that more forest is cut down is because the U.S. is spraying the existing coca fields. There are something on the order of 10 times the acreage has been cut down of what we would need to supply the entire world supply of cocaine if we weren't engaged in this kind of policy. And so, you think about the effects of global warming and global climate change, and you think about sort of our effect of, driving deforestation in, the world's refrigerator, the world's air conditioner, the Amazon rainforest. Of course, individual liberty, of course, intellectual integrity. SSDP gives you a lot of opportunities. Whatever your passions are, academically, there are ways in which your field of interest has a direct kind of connection to the work that we're doing in drug policy reform. Biology is obvious, physiology is obvious. Even in veterinary science, there's research. Of course, the environment and so forth. In the social sciences as well, your interests dovetail with the questions of how society is organized. And all of these fields have very important drug policy components. And I'm happy, one of the things I love doing with SSDP is consulting one-on-one with you about how your interests can plug into what's going on in the world. Last night we were talking about entheogens, religion. We were talking about the use of psilocybin, LSD, DMT, and so on. The humanities, of course, are deeply and intrinsically involved in this. You think about, the art. The persecution of drug users is a cultural persecution. Drug users have built a culture, we call it, in classic rock or modern rock and roll. I mean, you think about the intellectual achievements of the generation that has been using drugs for the last 30 years, and we call it Silicon Valley. You go into a head shop, you see these phenomenal works of glass art, you see posters, you see the influence of drugs upon a creative work that 1,000 years ago, 1,000 years from now, anthropologists will look at and say, what was this used for? What kind of sacred object was this? Wow, this is a fascinating piece of work. The seizure, the outlaw of those things is a form of religious and cultural persecution. All of the fields and kinds of careers that you're interested in potentially pursuing, you have the opportunity in SSDP to maximize the experience. You're interested in fundraising, communication. All of these fields play out in a way in which you can constructively use your talents and your passions to advance this drug policy reform work and to learn more, to build your own resume in terms of what you're accomplishing. And we operate also in a sort of almost tribal kind of level. I mean, we can learn, about what the myths of the drug culture are. We can study things about paths to truth. We can have heart-to-heart connection. The values of our organization about peace and nonviolence, about service, about pursuing our own sense of what the meaning of life is. That's a really valuable kind of thing. All of these skills that I've got on this slide are things that you can perfect, that you can carry out in doing your work with SSDP. Whoa, no, I didn't start. There we go. All right. Just, my own, so, I told you, I've gone to law school. Drug policy, my passion for drug policy served my career. I was an assistant public defender for 3 years at the beginning of my legal career. And while I was doing that, I worked with the ACLU, and I ran a normal chapter out of my law office. And in some miraculous feat of luck, I got hired by the U.S. Congress, by the Committee on the Judiciary, to be assistant counsel to the Subcommittee on Crime, and I did that for more than 9 years, where I was writing, all these federal laws, working with, my clients were the members of Congress, so I was negotiating with, senators, and I'm negotiating with industry and the Department of Justice. I would go to the Christmas party of DEA and the DEA administrator's office, gave a speech, to graduating DEA inspectors at Quantico. I mean, that was the circle in which I was operating. And at the same time, I'm doing all this other sort of stuff that you see on the screen. Talking about, I had this big sticker on my telephone, and it said "off the record." I was not supposed to talk to the press. And I would, I was working on a bill that would legalize the medical use of heroin in 1984. And so I'm talking with, the reporter from American Druggist magazine, and they're interested in, this. It was a bill to make the robbery of drugs from pharmacies a federal crime. It was not a specific federal crime. Of course, it was a state crime. And pharmacists were very concerned about, drug addicts coming in and stealing their drugs because the drugs were better in the pharmacy than on the street. And so I remember talking to the editor of American Druggist, and I just said, this is off the record, this is not for attribution, you can't use this for any way. But, if you think about this problem, why are drug addicts robbing drugstores for drugs? Because drugs are illegal. If heroin were legal, we wouldn't have these kinds of robberies. And the guy said, yeah, that's interesting. So he's not saying, holy shit, here's a guy, working for the House Judiciary Committee in the middle of the Reagan War on drugs, talking about drug legalization to, journalists over the telephone. Fortunately, that was not the story he ran with. Today's conference, you're going to have a terrific time at this conference. We're focusing on, some very interesting sort of scientific issues, some very useful policymaking stuff. You're going to learn a lot. You're going to acquire knowledge. You're going to increase your skills and acquire skills. This is, this I think you're going to find very, very stimulating. You're modeling sort of, what we think of as serious scholar activists. We are scholar activists, but we never forget to have fun, and we know how to have fun. We're going to have our national conference in September. Start planning on it. Make sure you got it on your calendar. Again, you're going to see your friends. You're going to have a lot of fun. We're going to lobby Congress. In 2015, whether you're still in SSDP as an undergrad or if you are an alumni, plan on coming back to Arlington for the International Reform Conference. It's going to be a fabulous event. Stay in touch with me. Thank you very much. You guys are the best. VCU is amazing. I love coming to VCU. You're such a class act. Thank you.
Does anyone have a question for Eric?
Drew.
Can you tell us about the beginning of SSDP? How did it get started?
Sure. Some students at Rochester Institute of Technology, a couple of other places, as the internet was just kind of getting started as a form of communication, became aware that Congress had passed an amendment to the Higher Education Act that would deny federal financial aid to students with drug convictions. And there was a recognition of the failures of the war on drugs. And a guy named David Borden, who was running something called the Drug Reform Coordination Network, which is one of the earliest efforts to sort of use this thing called the internet to facilitate communication in the drug policy reform movement. And David Borden is sort of like the Clark Kent of drug policy reform. How many of you know David? You don't. He's completely anonymous. Yeah, you don't want to raise your hand. David is this very unassuming guy, but has been a driver in organizing, the first international drug legalization conference in the Western Hemisphere outside the United States in Merida, Mexico. But he was a driver in the starting of SSDP and pulling the network together, and providing, then when they started having staff, providing them office space on Connecticut Avenue in Washington, D.C. So I've read over a half a dozen chapters that sort of got started. Brian Gralnick at George Washington University. Brian is right now running for state senator in Pennsylvania. He's challenging a corrupt Democratic incumbent who's been there for years, who's under investigation. And he's challenger. We have an SSDP alum who who has a good chance of being elected to the state senate. If he wins the Democratic primary, he's almost sure to get elected in this Democratic district, Brian Gralnick. You know, we had Sean Heller at GW. Sean had been an intern in the Clinton White House. And so we had extremely, Chris Lotlikar, very, very astute, sharp people involved in sort of putting this organization together. And I think this was about 1999, and I heard about it, and I said, this is great. And in the fall of 1999, an entrepreneur in New Hampshire was organizing a college student convention the weekend before the presidential primary in New Hampshire. How many of you from New Hampshire? Have any of you been to New Hampshire in primary season? A couple of hands? Yeah, good. Okay. So the president, I'd first gone up there in 1992 with what we call a bunch of marijuana activists from Maryland who called themselves the James Madison Liberation Front. This is when Bill Clinton was running for president, and Jerry Brown, and a bunch of other folks. And we were running around passing, holding up normal banners in front of churches on Sunday morning where, then George Bush was going to come, be a guest running for re-election in 2000. New Hampshire's presidential politics is retail. The candidate for president meets with an audience just about this size in a room like this, gives his 15 or 20 minute stump speech, and then takes questions from the audience. And this is going on, in December and January before the presidential primary. So in 2000, I got, for this college convention, I put up $5,000 to get SSDP as an official sponsor. Their banner was above the stage, and they had these tables, and we brought a whole bunch of people up, and we slept, bunches of people in hotel rooms, and we ate pizza 3 meals a day. And, there'd be like a John McCain event or a Pat Buchanan event, and the SSDP students would be scattered in the audience, wearing a tie like this clean-cut gentleman over here, and, McCain would raise his hand, is there any question? Yeah, you young fellow, well, Senator, what about medical marijuana? Why aren't you supporting that? And, what about you, young lady? Well, we should have sterile syringe exchange, to stop the spread of HIV and AIDS. You're not in favor of spreading AIDS, are you? Why did you support the federal ban on needle use? And, injecting this into, the political discourse. So we did the same. We did the same kind of thing. Well, let's see. I'm trying to remember. So 2000 is when Bush was running. So someone who came along was San-Ho Tree from the Institute for Policy Studies. San-Ho is sitting right there. San-Ho is maybe at that time, I don't know, 40 or so. Looks like a journalist. He's the only, just about the only person of color in the room. And so Bush calls on him, and San-Ho says, Governor, can you help us understand why your drug use has not been a problem in the campaign? I mean, you're ahead in the polls. Can you explain that? What does that say about what the American people think about, the drug issue? Well, I reject the premise of that question. And so the reporters and all flocked him. So do you have, what do you mean it's drug use? And Sanders said, he's never denied it. He never denied it. What's the evidence? He just never denied it. What more evidence do you need? So we just had a lot of fun. And so we did this again in 2012. There was a college convention in Concord, New Hampshire, and a bunch of us went. So I'm so telling stories that's sort of more about my own connection, Drew, rather than answering the question, and I'm sorry about that. But is there anything more that you'd like me to add? Or?
No, that's perfect. I just kind of wanted to give people a sense of the things that you're working on today are things that have been echoed for 10 years. We're the newest generation, but we've had, it's a continuation. We've had students working on the same kind of stuff, doing the same kind of stuff we've been doing for years. So I just kind of wanted to give them sort of the context of how we got here today.
Good. Another kind of a question.
Dr. Davis.
Yeah, sure.
Hi. In one of your first slides, I think I noticed when you were listing the phenotype of members of this organization, the last line was white. And so I wonder if you could elaborate on, I realize you're just reporting, but could you elaborate on that?
I don't know that white-run organizations know how to share power and make people of color feel comfortable. It is often a struggle. I think of the American Bar Association, where there has been a long effort to encourage lawyers of color to move into positions of leadership, and they do become presidents of the American Bar Association and so on. In a profession where there's there's the National Bar Association as a parallel organization. I don't think that there is any conscious or unconscious effort to exclude or desire to exclude. But I suspect that there's a way in which the organization has a culture which doesn't necessarily feel open enough, in which people of color feel comfortable as equals in it.
Well, you're certainly not the only organization.
No.
They could say that, and I wasn't implying any sort
No,
of
I understand that.
exclusion. But I was wondering if there's any outreach to other ethnic and racial groups by your organization.
I know that there is a very active diversity committee. This has been a passion of many people in the organization. At our last conference, there were long meetings about this. I know that the diversity committee is one of the largest and most engaged committees that sort of operate under the direction of the board. I think all of us are aware that the consequences of drug prohibition are unduly put upon people of color, people of lower class, people of economic means who can't afford counsel, who do not have health insurance to pay for inpatient or particular kind of drug treatment, particularly if you're sort of arrested and you need now something to show the court that you're treating your problem. We're very much aware of how this plays out in the culture, and it's part of our rhetoric. It's clear that that in itself is inadequate to help us become a larger and more inclusive and representative organization.
Thank you.
Anyone else have any questions?
That was an elbow, but not a question. How much time do we have? We out of time?
No, we have some time. We still have time for a little bit more questions. But go ahead. Would you like Mark?
After looking through Nixon and Reagan, did you ever think there would be a time when you would see states like Colorado and Washington legalizing marijuana?
Well, sure I did. If I didn't think that, I wouldn't have been talking about drug legalization the way I was in those times. Bullshit can only stand so long. Reagan's top drug advisor, Carlton Turner, at one point said, using marijuana leads you to become a homosexual. And of course was implying that's a bad thing. I mean, it was clear that people would say all kinds of absurd things. And those things are no longer accepted. People just know how preposterous they are. I think that I have always believed, in part of my own sort of cultural wiring, that we are making progress. We're moving forward. And you could look at moments of history and say, well, how can you possibly say that? We had, in the middle of the 20th century, Hitler and Stalin and Mao Zedong. How could you possibly, for hundreds of millions of people where there was no moving forward at all? Yet that's the kind of faith that I carry forward. I am a terrible prognosticator. I'm not at all able to predict. I worked for the Congress for 9 years. In 2010, there was the bill to tweak the mandatory minimum crack cocaine law to raise the 5-gram trigger of crack cocaine for a 5-year mandatory minimum to 28 grams. That's what the Senate passed. So that here's a bill that will only benefit crack dealers. Those are the only beneficiaries of this act of Congress, the Fair Sentencing Act, are crack dealers. No one else benefits. And it's only this range of crack dealers who are selling crack between 5 grams and 28 grams at one level, or between 50 grams and 280 grams. And I said to myself, not to myself, I said to the people I was working with on this legislation, no way the Republicans in the House are going to allow this bill to come to the floor, without a vote. They're going to force the Democrats to justify this crack dealer bill. It's 2010. The House Republicans are not going to let an Obama liberal civil rights favoring piece of legislation pass. That's not in their DNA. How could they let that happen? Well, they did let it happen. They let it happen on a voice vote. There was no recorded vote in the House or the Senate on that legislation. So here's something where I've been following it intensely for more than 30 years. I completely misunderstood the politics of it. So, I'm not a good prognosticator. I'm naive and hopeful. Another kind of question. Yeah.
What would optimal drug regulation look like for you?
Oh, okay, that's a good question. Let's start with some of the harder drugs. Let's start with heroin. Heroin needs to be made available to all people who have habits, who are dependent on heroin. It ought to be available to them at relatively low cost, and potentially on a kind of condition that they are meeting social needs. As a former public defender, I had drug addicts who worked very hard as criminals. You can be a compulsive drug addict, and you can be a very hardworking shoplifter, a very hardworking thief, a very hardworking prostitute. I mean, you know how to work hard, and you have the capacity and the energy and the motivation to do that. So the challenge is to pull people out of a sort of sense that I am an outlaw, and that is my whole environment are outlaws. To say, okay, I'm a heroin maintenance patient, and I'm having to go to counseling with my wife or my partner. I've got to meet responsibilities with my kids. Maybe I need to go to classes. I've got to show up at my job. And these become ways in which, the access to heroin becomes a motivator for social achievement, social accomplishment. Once your life is stabilized, once you're not simply focused exclusively on how can I cop so I can get off, once your life is stabilized, then you have the resource to say, okay, you know what, now I'm going to quit. But the way in which we sort of approach this abstinence, think of a little kid who's climbed up to the top of a very high tree, and the parents are all desperate. They want the kid to come out of the high tree. They're afraid the kid will fall, and so everybody's standing down below. Jump! Jump! We'll catch you. Jump! Well, no, that's terrifying. What you say to the kid is, move your right foot down about 6 inches, a little bit more. You climb down step by step. And it seems to me that sort of people who have very serious drug problems can be encouraged to climb down step by step. The abstinence insistence is jump, for God's sake. You're asking people to do something that is so frightening and so uncomfortable. We see how frequently it is ineffective. So I want, it's the most important drugs to legalize and control are the opiates like heroin and cocaine, because that's where the most violence, the most crime, the most death are related. Legalizing marijuana is nice. It's politically easy because it's so non-harmful. Lots of people know what the high is like, and it's not so disabling. Yes, I've met people who are marijuana addicts. I know people, they flushed their marijuana down the toilet and then went out and bought some more and got high because they were dependent on marijuana. It's not a big population. And probably people who smoke too much marijuana. So marijuana, can be many ways it can be legalized. I've been a fan, to try to sell to conservatives what I call the hunting license model. Any of you hunt? Any of you got a hunting license? A few people? Okay. So you want to get a hunting license, you go to the sporting goods store and you put down $25. Maybe you have to take a test, a safety test of some kind. You go off and you have some kind of limit on how you do it. So my marijuana hunting license model is you go to the garden store and you get a state license, and you pay $25 and you get to sort of grow, 5 plants. You want to grow more plants? Maybe a bigger thing. And a bigger license. And you can't sell it. You can't give it to children. And there's a certain kind of revenue about it. And it's about as complicated as getting a hunting license. Protects individual liberty, generates a certain kind of revenue, but you can give it away. Like you can, give away your excess zucchini squash. You can give away your extra tomatoes. You can give away your extra apple pie. You can give away, your extra homebrew beer. Or, of course, you give it away. Maybe you exchange it. I'll, give you some of my buds in exchange for the tune-up of my car. I mean, there would be non-cash transactions exist in the economy in some way, and that at least sort of what we want to do is we want to take as much as possible the criminal traffic out of it. So that would be one kind of model. The classic alcohol model that we're seeing developing in Colorado and Washington, that's of course another model. That's one we're all comfortable with. The stimulants like cocaine trickier. I don't, probably if there was more availability of coca leaf tea, cocaine chewing gum, ways in which people could ingest cocaine without sort of getting so many rushes. But stimulants are much harder, I think, are harder to control. So I would imagine a kind of thing like what I call a consulting pharmacist. You want to go to get cocaine, you'd go to a pharmacist. We've got, any of you go to pharmacy school? So pharmacists, you get a Bachelor of Science in Pharmacy, and then you go to work for CVS, and you stand behind the counter, and essentially, you're juggling the insurance calls, and the patients, and counting the pills, and typing up the labels, and it's in its practice often a highly clerical and administrative job, rather than sort of a counseling job, using all the knowledge that you've acquired about drugs and interaction. So I'm envisioning a consulting pharmacist as someone who knows a lot about drugs and how they work and what you use them for. In particular, then, psychedelic drugs, mind-altering drugs, the controlled substances. And someone would come in. I read in Playboy that you have longer erections if you use cocaine, and I'm having problems with my erections. So the consulting pharmacist would say, well, so. Okay, we might be able to do something about it. What drugs what other drugs are you using? Well, I smoke some reefer. I drink about a bottle of whiskey a day. Well, wait, stop right there. Maybe your erection problem is, you don't need another drug. Maybe you need to sort of dial down some of your drug use. Well, I'm perfectly willing to give you cocaine if I thought it was appropriate. But, mixing cocaine and lots of alcohol, is a recipe for disaster. So I wouldn't recommend cocaine in your case. Let's see what we can do about sort of solving your erection problem with a less, sort of street knowledge sort of approach. Somebody else comes in and says, I've got a big project. The boss says I've got to get, this campaign outlined and finished. I got a 40-page proposal I got to write, and I got the presentation to the client's boss, and blah 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 blah. And so I want to stay, high for the next 2 days so I get this work done. Well, then again, you begin to sort of say, well, there are other stimulants that might not be as problematic, or okay, so here's some stimulants, and we'll sort of monitor how that works for you. But the goal, in some sense, is to begin with a default position of liberty. You're an adult. You get to take chances. America, how many have heard the jingle on the radio? America runs on Duncan. America runs on Duncan. Show of hands. Yeah, good. I just want to make sure you know what I'm talking about. So, I thought about that. America runs on risk. It runs on risk. That's what our historical driver's been. Think of the riskiness of sailing across the Atlantic, in little boats to North America, or the risk of trying to cross the Appalachians, or settle, the plains, or dig for gold, or start a business. The people who come here are, have been, America's a kind of a refuge for the ambitious. Think of your grandparents, your great-grandparents, or those who've struggled in your life. America's a place where you can have a refuge for ambition, and ambition involves risk. We encourage it. And that drug use, of course, presents risks. But these risks are exaggerated by prohibition. And people have a right to run risk. Getting high is risky. It may have a lot of benefits. You may like aspects of it. But we all know it's risky even when the drugs are legal. They're going to be risky. But those are within the universe of risk that we're highly tolerant of. Take skiing. How many of you are downhill skiers? Raise your hand. Ski board. Yeah, okay. So, how many think skiing's dangerous? Raise your hand. Yeah, right. It's dangerous. We all know Congressman Sonny Bono, died in a skiing accident. Nobody went to the floor of the House and said, Mr. Speaker, the bill I introduced today to outlaw alpine skiing will save lives. Every day, somebody's at risk of dying on the dangerous white slopes of America, and it is time, my bill will save one life. Blah, blah, blah. You're sort of saying, let's go shit. We all know it's dangerous. That's part of why we're doing it, right? We chase thrills. I have a 15-year-old daughter. She went out for the track team. Okay, so, physical, are you physically fit? Okay, now, Eric, sign the waiver. You know what I mean? The waiver. We explicitly are not liable if your daughter is injured, paralyzed, or dies in the course of, being on the track team. Fill out this card. Please identify the hospital you want your daughter sent to if she's hurt. And every parent in the high school who's got a kid on any team is filling out the name of the hospital. Now, we believe in risk. So some kid may trip. Some kid may break her leg. We know that boys die playing football every year or are paralyzed. For whatever the benefits of football are. But it saved one life. We accept risk. We run on risk. Drugs are risky. So we have to, in some sense, very much accept those risks and figure out how to increase them, how to integrate the management of that risk, and to adopt policies then to reduce those risks, because prohibition magnifies those risks. Now, just to conclude with your thing about psychedelics. The summers that I was in law school, I led wilderness canoe trips for high school students in Maine. Part of the reason why I just had this very weird legal career, I never learned how to be a lawyer. During the summer, most law students are in law firms, learning the craft of the law, and I'm out in the woods, teaching boys, this is how you chop down trees safely, this is how you split wood without splitting your leg, this is how you make a fire without burning the forest down, this is how you shoot the rapids, this is how you wash, this is how you dispose of your poop, this is how you, leave the forest clean and safe and you come out alive and healthy at the end of it. Highly risky. I'm licensed by the state of Maine as a wilderness canoe trip leader. My camp is insured. I've had training. So we ought to have licensed LSD trip leaders. There ought to be psychedelic guides. People who've had psychedelic experiences would say, okay, I'm available to initiate you, to give you, to help you have a trip that will be safe. What we have now is, 16-year-old girl has got some pill of something that she thinks is MDMA, thinks it's LSD, thinks it's mescaline, thinks it's organic, pure, whatever, who knows what it is. And, she lives in the suburbs, and she's going to go down to a concert at the Verizon Center. And so before she gets on the metro, she takes the pill, and, sort of it'll be peaking when she gets to the stadium. But it's actually peaking as she's roaring down on the subway, and having her mind being blown, And, there's no harm reduction there. Our challenge, clearly is how to enable risk takers to protect themselves. Because we're not abolishing America's absorption and fascination and, utilization of risk. So that's my long-winded answer to your short question.
All right, thanks.
So I'm out of time.
We're out of time. We're going to have like a short 15-minute break, get some water, use the restroom. Again, there's a choice of 1 or 2 panels. One will be in here. The other one will be, it's called the forum room. It's on the opposite side on the first floor here. And there will be an SSDP sign in front of the door to guide you into the room.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.